And so here's a map of Australia that, from a sterile sort of description by a demographer, albeit a very reputable one, John Taylor at the ANU, which shows the disbursement, the population around Australia. And you sort of say, well, that's very good, I can see figures down the bottom, but behind that is a story, a collage of both in tragic sort of stories around genocide, stolen children, disbursement of peoples off their traditional lands, marginalisation of Aboriginal people, not only off their lands, from outside of the mainstream economy, and this whole issue and burden that's placed by the impoverishment of Aboriginal people on the Australian society. Yet also behind there is a great story, a celebration of resilience and survival by Aboriginal people, regardless of what's happened in the last 200 years. And I think that the way forward for Aboriginal people, and especially in Victoria and for Parks Victoria, is to move away from thinking that Aboriginal people in Victoria are a liability, but much more focus on the strengths of what you have in an Aboriginal society and the diversity of it in Victoria. And so, with our task force, we found issues like our recommendations, and there's some website addresses there. I'm not going to give you really a lot of detail on paper here, other than to give you a couple of links and you can read them at home. But our task force recommendations, not only in this case might have applied to Northern Australia, but they very much can be emulated and processed and utilised elsewhere in Australia when it comes to not only the management of water and about development, but the recognition of Indigenous rights and interests of Aboriginal people, and what role Aboriginal people can play in maintaining a healthy country, and in turn bringing that balance we call Lian to the fore. So these were the focus around our recommendations, and once we got up into Northern Australia, where I live, you start to realise the competing values that we were confronted with. Chairing a task force, go look for development, find out where we can put the bauxite mine, find out where we can grow grapes, find out where we can grow corn and canola, find out where all the water is and come back and tell us. And we get up there and we find 40% of Northern Australia's under the control or ownership of Aboriginal people, firstly. In some places, 50% of the population is Aboriginal. We also find that there's third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation non-Aboriginal people in Northern Australia who have just as much connection to country as Aboriginal people. We also find that, and I was thinking of listening to Steve and Aaron, and thinking of a old couple, Walter and Martha, who were the odd ones out in Northern Australia, because the bulk of people in places where I come from are generally Australian people from the 6 major city centres. And they've got a value system themselves of what Northern Australia is all about. And, but going back to Martha and Walter, I can never get their Texan accent right, but Martha and Walter had retired, and he was quite loaded, much to my good fortune. Because I, at one time, dabbled in a bit of tourism as a tour guide, and got paid well for it if I had the opportunity to do them. And I had an ocker, which seated about 12 people. And Martha was just enjoying life now that old Walter had retired, and gave Martha the gold card. But Martha used to get up, "Come on, Walter, Joe's going to show us this beautiful Bunuba country, and he's got a story to tell and that, and you're going to show us these bush tuckers, And come on, Walter goes, no, Martha, you go ahead. I've got my... And he's sitting at the back reading a book. There's the first stop, get off to the second stop. Walter, come on, Joe's going to show us this. Martha, go ahead. Joe, take Martha, and I'll see you when you get back. Travel along to the next stop, and I was quite happy with that. I said, all right, Walter, I'll just leave you there. As long as you're safe, you're not going to get bitten by a snake or anything. And I'll look after Martha and the gold card. But the third time, and we travel along, we get out, oh, Walter, come on, we've travelled all this way from Houston. Joe's going to show us this. Martha, if I've told you once, I've told you twice. I'll look at the photos when I get back. And I'm not putting Steve or Aaron down, but it just reminded me of these two old characters and the diversity and the type of people that come up to my country and that I get the good fortune of meeting. But one of the things that Parks Victoria needs to realise, and I think is an opportunity, is that what we found in Northern Australia is the basic premise of Aboriginal people is that land, water and people are inextricably connected. What a fantastic asset. If you've got someone so passionate about that point, then why not harness that energy in not only extracting the embedded traditional science in that society and in that individual that's been built up over thousands of years. Why not harness that energy? Why not also harness that energy into land management systems? Why not harness that energy and that leadership to build reconciliation in a place like Victoria? And what a great place to do it. A government, regardless of the Yorta Yorta decision here, the native title decision, that the government's moved on in a social justice sense to find a balance and social justice for not only the Yorta Yorta but all Aboriginal people in Victoria. Why not harness that and continue it by building a network of Aboriginal people to assist you to look after country? And as I said, I admired Damien Bell, who I met at the 2020 summit, but every time I go to a forum where Damien's speaking, he's constantly spruiking on about the Gunditj Mira country and what he's doing and building a weir, and I thought, well, I'll fix Damien up this time. I shall bring photos of snapshots of my country to show and get you mob to judge who's got the best country. But in all seriousness, I just live in a little small town. I have all the opportunities in the world to be able to meet anybody in this country. But it's still, and I'm talking about Aboriginal impoverishment here, and what role a department like Parks Victoria can play in the alleviation of poverty and engagement of Aboriginal people. But I look at it from Fitzroy Crossing, in a place that per annum about $75 million comes into the Fitzroy Valley in service delivery in some form or other. We have an Australian government that is quite happy to annually commit to $1.6 billion of service delivery per annum. And that comes out of all our taxpayers' pockets, my pockets, your pockets. And yet it's the same old, every year, year in, year out, indexed to CPI, and nothing changes.